We have someone that becomes literally obsessed with a friend, and when that friend started pulling back, the only way that they could control them was to take their life.
Fulton County's lead prosecutor on this case, Cassie Hall, says this case handled by the Fulton DA's major case unit involved two stunning women so tight they called each other sister, a relationship that ended in stunning fashion.
When you think of your closest friend, I'm sure you imagine laughter, trust, shared secrets, and of course, safety. Shameria Mimi Fletcher was a woman known for her kindness, leadership, and sisterhood. Yet, in 2022, she was fatally harmed by Okisha Range, a friend who Shameria lovingly called a sister. There's a lot to unpack here: financial freeloading, a breach of trust, and of course, jealousy. This is Fatal Friendships with Parke Jones. Shameria was a pillar in her community. Born in January 1988 in Fayetteville, Georgia, she excelled academically and became a proud alumna of Georgia State University, where she served as vice president of her chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha, an achievement indicating her leadership capabilities. She made everyone around her feel seen. Her sorority sisters describe her as almost always smiling, a woman whose presence lit up the room. Shameria's friend Antoinette Degree shares similar sentiments.
Shameria was so fun, loving, caring, giving, just goofy, smiling all the time. Just down-to-earth, loving girl.
Shameria and Okisha were best friends, so much so that they were also roommates living together in Midtown Atlanta. What seemed like a normal, healthy friendship deepened into something darker. Prosecutors called Antoinette on the stand, and Antoinette was a former roommate who had lived with the two women for nearly 10 months. She described an unusual dynamic and a huge red flag. Okisha was isolating Shameria.
We roommate together. They seemed to have a great relationship.
Antoinette Degree told us she roomed with both women about 10 months and testified for the prosecution.
I wanted justice for Mimi because during the time that I was in her space, I didn't feel like she was being treated fair in the friendship.
Was Okisha controlling?
Very controlling.
Prosecutors say Okisha's behavior grew increasingly controlling. She even faked illnesses to manipulate Shameria. And over time, she isolated Shameria from friends and family, and even stranger, Okisha was heavily dependent on Shameria.
Ms. Hall says for years while Mo Range roomed with Mimi, Mo mooched off Mimi, whose personality sparkled so much she had been elected president of the Eta Mu chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority at Georgia State.
Okisha Range didn't buy herself food, she didn't pay any rent, she didn't have a source of income.
In early 2022, Shameria was planning to go on a trip without Okisha. And that's when Okisha snapped.
The tragic story of Mimi and Mo. Okisha Range, nicknamed Mo, was so controlling of her roommate Shameria Mimi Fletcher, attempting to isolate her from friends and family. It was like she had a stranglehold on Mimi's life. But when Mimi broke free by scheduling a trip without Mo,
an annual trip that she had missed prior years because of this defendant,
Okisha Range literally strangled Ms. Fletcher at the Midtown condo where they lived, says Fulton County Chief Senior Assistant District Attorney Cassie Hall.
She beat her where she had contusions all over her body from her head to her feet, and then after that, she strangled her to death.
When police arrived, they found Shameria unresponsive, lifeless, and Okisha was standing nearby. Emergency responders pronounced Shameria at the scene. In a stunning lack of accountability that coincides with her freeloading and controlling behavior, Okisha came up with a ridiculous explanation of what caused Shameria's injuries.
Prosecutor Hall says Ms. O'Range suggested she and the victim had been play fighting and Mo kicked Mimi.
I said, "Look, quit playing," and I kicked.
But that Mimi was alive and talking after that, but that doesn't explain the choking.
Now, ask yourself this. Why would two adult women play fight? Or play fight to the point that someone gets fatally injured? The story she shared just didn't line up with Shameria's injuries, and after manipulating her best friend for years, she foolishly thought she could manipulate police too.
Oh my gosh, I can't even. I'm seizing.
Ms. Hall says Mo Range frequently feigned illness to manipulate Mimi Fletcher. And in 2 Atlanta police interviews, Mo acted as if she was having seizures. But the prosecution used that against her, playing excerpts at Keisha Range's recent trial, which culminated in a conviction for murder and a life without parole sentence.
Fulton County officials described what happened to Shameria as violent, purposeful, and the result of a long simmering control. Okeisha didn't just act in the moment, she had been building power for months, finding different ways to control Shameria. Okeisha received life in prison, and her defense attorney Anton Rowe shared his thoughts too.
Defense attorney Anton Rowe.
Miss Range does in fact continue to maintain her innocence of all charges and allegations. Being a freeloader does not equal
Now, defense attorney Rowe says he does not believe his client, Ms. Range, was controlling to the extent that Ms. Fletcher was isolated from family and friends. Ms. Degree says she witnessed Mo behave certain ways when Mimi's friends were around, and when it came to drawing attention to her illnesses, that led Ms. Degree to conclude Mo was indeed controlling.
This case forces us to examine friendship, trust, and abuse. Too often, we think abuse only happens in romantic relationships, but that's not true. Toxic control can exist anywhere, especially in platonic bonds that blur into obsession. It also raises questions about gender and DV. Can we see controlling behavior early enough? And what is the right way to intervene? I've heard stories like this and even had my own run-ins with friends who seemed to be a little bit off. I'll never forget, in college, I had been friends with this one girl for maybe 6 months. Everything was good and normal, but when I'd miss her phone calls, she would leave me these crazy voicemails. It was bizarre, and I was young. I had never experienced this type of behavior from a friend before. At first, I thought she was kidding, but after I spoke to her, I realized that she was serious. She was speaking to me kind of like a mother reprimanding a child. Boundaries have always been important to me, so I quickly ended that friendship.
I think when you see the signs multiple times, you have to leave.
If you've ever felt controlled, manipulated, or silenced by someone you trusted, know this. You can speak up. Share with a friend or family member, and if you recognize red flags in someone you know, act. It just might save a life. Shameria deserved more than betrayal from her best friend. She deserved a life full of community, success, and love. So let me know your thoughts. Have you ever seen a friendship turn dark? If you enjoyed this episode of Fatal Friendships, please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe. I'm your host, Parke Jones, and I'll catch you on the next one.